Now, already we have seen the layered architecture of JP. Okay. Now, if you consider like JP layered architecture, we have different layers. For suppose like the model layer we have, DAO layer we have, service layer you have, like and then UA layer we have. Okay. Now, within the model layer, now we have the classes, employee class we have. In the DAO, now we have like employee DAO, like it's an interface, and employee DAO IMPL we have. And again, in the service class, we have a employee service is the interface we have, and employee service IMPL we have. Okay. In the UI, like simply here we have the client. Okay, if you observe, now we need like only one XML like meta NF also we have in the JPA data structure. Okay. Now within the XML, we need to provide like a database information and again like a hybrid information we need to provide it. Okay. Now one more point here, like if you want to create the data into the database, if you want to store in the database, simply we need entity object. But in this packages, we are not going to mention anywhere like entity, like entity manager or entity manager factory. For that, what we created, like in the DAO layer only, we created like one class that is a JPA util class we created. Okay, within the JPA util class only, now we got like an entity object. Okay, now if you want to get that entity object, like we need to write what like an intermediate factory like percent dot create an entity factory. Okay, now create entity manager. Okay, these lines of code we need to write. Okay, now without writing all these things simply here, this entity object finally we need in the DAO only. Why? In the sense, from the database, if we want to fetch or if we want to insert the data, we need entity object only. But this entity object where we can use in the DAO only. Okay. Now in that case, in the DAO layer, now we need entity object. Then how we are going to get that entity object? Okay. Now means this class object we are going to use inside this DAO. Okay. Now we know that like auto wire annotation, but it is entity related. That's why we are going to use one annotation at the data persistence context. Just remember like what I'm explaining right now. I will show you that in the code. Okay. Persistent context of entity. Okay. Now entity object is automatically created. We don't need to write the JPA two lines of code. Okay. In the JPA we wrote like two lines of code like entity create, entry manager factory and entry manager. All these lines of code we need to write. But without writing all these things, just you can mention. Okay, just you can mention this annotation with entity object. That's it. Object is automatically created of entity. Okay, now we can write like a private entity manager factory entity, and above this entity manager factory entity, now we can write this annotation. Okay, now this annotation will create that object of entity automatically. Okay, now this entity object we can use in the DAY. Okay, now the data is entered into the DAY. Now we need to access in the service AMPL. Okay, then how we can access the data from DAO IMPL to service IMPL? That's a point. Like till now in the JP also we created objects. The DAO object we created in the service IMPL. But we are working with like Spring. Now we need to integrate it right now. Okay, we need the DAO object in the service IMPL. But we need to the DAO object. Then how we can create that object here? Okay, now in the annotation level we discussed the creation of bean or creation of object is created by the component annotation, right? Okay, here they provided stereotype annotations for that user defined classes. Okay, if it is a DAO layer, now we can use at the data repository. Okay, at the repository annotation. Okay, if it is a service layer, at the data service annotation. Okay, now it is equals to, okay, it is equals to component annotation also. Okay, use component annotation, or otherwise simply you can use this stereotype annotation. We can call like these names or stereotype annotations. Okay, other component also you can use it. The purpose of component is what? It's creating object, it's creating the bean. Okay, now here this employee DAO object by using address repository annotation, It is creating the DAO layer object, and here the service annotation, the service object is created. Okay, service object is created. Okay, service object is created. Now, then how I can access this thing? Okay, now we create like service annotation, and the repository annotation is creating like this DAO object and a service object. It's created by the service objects or bean, simply we can say that. But how I can access the DAO object into the service layer? Okay, now this DAO is a dependent object in the service layer. Dependent object, how we can use it? Now, in the service IMPL, we can go with the data auto wire annotation. Okay, auto wire of like a DAO, employee DAO, IMPL, like this we can use it. Okay, now we got the DAO object. Now we don't need to worry about like that creation of object, all these things. Okay, you can wiring the object of DAO to service IMPL. That's it. Okay, now here we'll go with the two ways. Spring JPA with the XML way. Now Spring JPA with the Java way. Okay, now we know that XML way is like a lot of number of lines of code, and again Java also like lot of number of lines of code. Okay, now first I will show you that how. Now first, if you observe like the entities, now there is no changes in the entity. If you observe carefully here, now entity annotation, table annotation, ID, generated value. Like what's the purpose of this generated value? Any idea?
Yeah, auto ID numbers like one, two, three,
Exactly.
four.
Yeah, auto increment of IDs. Okay, now we know that like all these things. Okay, entity class is done. Okay, now if I go with like DAO, the DAO IAM here. See here, earlier we have the JP util class, but right now we don't have any util class. See here, now just we need to write a private entity manager entity. Now here we need to set entity manager. Entity manager is equal to this dot entity manager is equal to entity manager. Now in the 18th line was only we created object because of add the data persistent to context. It will create a entity object. Okay, it will create entity manager object. Okay, now if you want a DAO layer object, in a sense we can use what repository annotation. Okay, now we can create repository annotation. Then what about like this transaction annotation? What's the purpose? Okay, ఇంతకుముందు మనం DAO layer లో లైక్ మనం బిగిన్ ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ గెట్ ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ మెథడ్స్ కూడా రాసాం. ఓకే, ఎందుకు అంటే నేను డిఎంఎల్ ఆపరేషన్ చేయాలంటే మనం కంపల్సరీగా బిగిన్ చేయాలి, కమిట్ చేయాలి ట్రాన్సాక్షన్స్. ఓకే, అలా ప్రతిసారి ప్రతి ఆపరేషన్ రాయకుండా just we are using transaction annotation. We don't need to write for any operation. Okay, begin transaction and commit transaction without writing all these things. Simply transaction annotation is it will take care about like a begin transaction and a commit transaction. Okay, see here we got like entity manager object persist, entity object of find, entity manager of find, and entity manager of find, and like a merge and a remove. Okay, now the same lines of code is going to be repeating in the Spring Boot also. Like I will explain like line by line of code. But here, the what is the main disadvantages here? Okay, now if you go with like service layer, we have the service annotations here. The DAO object is wired with the employee DAO with the service IMPs here, auto wire. Okay, now if you want to get the DAO objects here, we can create like employee DAO is equal to now simply auto wire. This DAO object is wiring with internally with service IMP. Okay, now here the main point is here. We don't need to write like any begin transaction, commit transaction. Actually, we don't. Okay, now mainly this configuration file only. Okay, now we need to write like we need to copy from the Google like this many lines of code with XXD. Now here this many tags we need to write. You know that component scan annotation, context colon component annotation scan. Like you know that this annotation, right? Now at the rate component to scan. Okay, it will scan the packages, right? Okay, it is a Java level. Java level we use this annotation, but here instead of that annotation it is a tag. Okay, it is a XML way, it's a tag. Okay, the base package it need to be searched for the annotation service layer and a DO layer. అంటే ఏం చెప్తుంది ఈ ట్యాగ్ పర్పస్ ఏంటి అంటే కాంపోనెంట్ స్కాన్ అయితే ఎక్కడైతే అనోటేషన్స్ ఉన్నాయో అక్కడ సెర్చ్ చేయమంటుంది. బేస్ ప్యాకేజ్ సేమ్ ఇచ్చాం మనం, సర్వీస్ లేయర్ డిఓ లేయర్ ఇచ్చాం. ఓకే, డేటాబేస్ ప్రాపర్టీస్ మనం ప్రొవైడ్ చేయాలి. ఈ డేటాబేస్ ప్రాపర్టీస్ కి లైక్ డాటా సోర్స్ విత్ డ్రైవర్ మేనేజర్ డాటా సోర్స్, ఇది ప్రీడిఫైన్డ్ క్లాస్ అనమాట. ఓకే, దిస్ ఇస్ అ ప్రీడిఫైన్డ్ క్లాస్. నౌ దీస్ ప్రాపర్టీస్ వి నో దట్. ఓకే, ఈ ప్రాపర్టీస్ మనకు తెలుసు, కానీ ఈ క్లాస్ మనకు ఓకే ఐడియా లేదు. ఓకే, నెక్స్ట్ ఇప్పుడు ఇది ఎంట్రీ మేనేజర్ ఫ్యాక్టరీ. నౌ హియర్ local container entry manager factory B, it is also class. Okay, till now we don't have any idea. Okay, now JPA vendor information as well as a hybrid JPA vendor adapter. Okay, this thing also we don't have any idea. Okay, now these properties we have. Okay, we know that. And again one more class, JPA transaction manager. Okay, now property placeholder configuration. Okay, now what are these classes? All these classes simply here, even though as a Java developer we cannot remember like all these type of classes. Okay, now here in the XML way, now we need to provide like packages with the classes, all these things. Okay, as a Java developer, like we are not going to concentrate on like using more XML. Okay, that's why we'll go with like Java way. Okay, we'll go with like Java way only. Now if you observe the Java way, now we have only the same configuration file is there. Even though here also see here we need to mention like this many annotations, and for the bean tag we are using the bean annotation here. What we wrote like extra, if even if you observe like here the same number of lines of code, 67 lines of code we wrote. Here also the same lines of code. See here, any changes? No changes. The thing is what here again, classes, these classes. Now as a Java developer we need to remember like this predefined classes. These are all are predefined only, it's not user defined. Okay, now these are all are predefined. Now Spring is provided. Okay, now Spring provided annotations for user defined classes. ఓకే, యూజర్ డిఫరెంట్ క్లాస్గా ఏం ప్రొవైడ్ చేసిందంటే ఇక్కడ చూడండి, ఈ డిఓ లేయర్ లో మీరు అబ్జర్వ్ చేస్తే ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ అండ్ డిపాజిటరీ అనోటేషన్ ఉంది. ఓకే, సర్వీస్ లేయర్ లో సర్వీస్ అనోటేషన్ ఉంది. ఇక్కడ చూస్తే ఈ సర్వీస్ ఎంపీలో మనం డిఫైన్ చేసింది. ఓకే, డిఓ ఎంపీలో మనం డిఫైన్ చేసింది. అంటే స్ప్రింగ్ అనేది ఈ యూజర్ డిఫరెంట్ క్లాసెస్ కి అనోటేషన్స్ ఇచ్చేసింది, కానీ ఈ ప్రీ డిఫరెంట్ క్లాసెస్ కి అనోటేషన్స్ ఇవ్వలేదు. ఓకే, నా ఈ క్లాసెస్ అని మనం కామన్ గా యూజ్ చేశారు. ఈ కామన్లీ యూజ్డ్ క్లాసెస్ దట్ ద స్ప్రింగ్ ఈస్ నాట్ ప్రొవైడింగ్ ఎనీ అనోటేషన్. దట్ ఇస్ ద మెయిన్ డిసడ్వాంటేజ్. Okay, now if you observe like if you want to develop a project, for suppose it will take like 3 months of time. Okay, 3 months of time. If you want to develop like an application, it will take like 2 months. Okay, 2 months for to complete the configuration file. Okay, configuration file. Then when you will develop like within 1 month you will develop like application. Simply it's not possible. Okay, means as a developer we need to concentrate on only the configuration. It will take a lot of time to write like this many packages and classes. Okay, now that's why the Spring Boot is entered into the picture. Okay, Spring Boot is entered into the picture. The Spring Boot is provided a configuration file, entire configuration file. We don't need to write a single lines of code. Now 0 lines. Now this 67 lines of code is written by the Spring Boot itself only. Okay, we don't need to write in a single bit line of code. The entire configuration is provided by the Spring Boot itself. Okay, that's the point. The remaining code is everything is same. Okay, that extra like the web services concept we are going to add to that Spring Boot. Okay, now for suppose if I execute first, I will check that database connection. Ka and ka 1 2 3. We'll go with that. Okay, it is for SQL Oracle only. select the star from tab. Okay, now we have that table, emp underscore info. Okay, now I'm going to execute it. See, employee UL. Now we know that like this structure already we have seen in the core Java level. Right click, run as Java application. Now I'm going to insert some data. Enter your choice is one, like employee name, Karthik, like salary, something, like city, Hyderabad. Now see, the data is inserted. Okay, data is inserted. Whether the data is inserted or not, simply here, I want to go with the select star from emp underscore info. Now say we got like one Hyderabad Karthik 44747. Okay. Now like this we can insert. Okay, this is the normal way. But I want to go with by using some URL. For suppose like my application is running on like in our machine local host. Now my application is running on some port number like 8967. Okay, and I have like employee class. Within the employee class I want to add an employee. Okay, by using this URL I'm going to insert my data. Okay, I want to update the data, I want to delete the data, I want to get all the data. Okay, if you want to understand this concept simply, now we need to go with like web services. Okay, now tomorrow we are going to start like a Spring Boot introduction. Okay, Spring Boot introduction. Now then we need to know that how to create like Spring Boot project. Okay, how to create like Spring Boot project. Now how to add dependencies in the sense like jar files. Here we can call like some starters concept is there. Okay, we'll see that tomorrow. Okay, that Spring Boot introduction, like how to add dependencies. Okay, all these things we'll see tomorrow. Day after tomorrow we can add like web services concept. If it is possible tomorrow is we can add it. Okay, web services is like we can add the rest URLs. Okay, or rest endpoints we can say that. Just you need to observe today like Jpa Layerd Architecture as well as this. Okay, video you can observe carefully. Okay, you can find out the difference between the two things. Okay, just we remove that XML file. Okay, now if it is a Java way, we remove like XML file as well as we remove the DO layer JP util class. In the DO layer right now we have only two classes, two files we have. But in the case of JP Layerd Architecture we have the three files. Okay, just observe carefully here. What is the differences? What are the changes here we have? That's it. Okay. Now in the Spring Boot level, I will explain each and every line of code. Okay. Now that's all
Yeah,
for today.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah, bye.